The first time I heard it, I thought a man was eating in the dark beside my head, slow and wet, a mouth working through something that did not want to be food. It came through the headphones as a low grind, then a soft crack, then a pulpy drag like teeth pulling fibers loose. The sound did not sit in my ears, it sat in my jaw. My molars ached as if they remembered doing it. I tore the cups off and the control room filled with the dry hum of fans and racks and monitors, but the ache stayed. Outside the window, the desert night pressed against the glass, black and cold, and above it the sky was crowded with stars that did not care what we were doing to them. I put the headphones back on because I was paid to be stubborn. The signal came again, a pattern buried in noise that should have been empty, a set of broad waves from the direction of the great void. A region of space so wide that our minds refused it, a hole in the map where thousands of galaxies should have been, a bruise in the universe that the textbooks called an anomaly and the grant proposals called an opportunity. We had named it as if naming made it safe. The great void sounded like a mouth. When I leaned closer to the console, the sound leaned closer to me, and my tongue tasted pennies. My gums felt loose, as if something had been chewing from the inside. I did not tell anyone yet. I saved the file and labeled it as calibration error, because that is what you do when the universe sends you something you cannot fit into a spreadsheet. By morning the file was still there, and the great void was still missing, and the chewing did not stop. My name is Ethan Cole, and I was not supposed to be an astronomer. I came to the desert because the sky is quiet out here, and because quiet is what you can sell to people with money. I tuned concert halls once, then I tuned sound stages, then I tuned the thin scream of a radio dish that could hear hydrogen from the far side of time. The university wanted someone who could find a signal hidden under a mountain of static, someone who could separate the faint from the false. I was good at that. I could hear the lie in a waveform. I could hear a loose cable as a bruise in the spectrum. The facility was called Whetstone Array, a ring of white dishes spread across a dry basin like bones of some enormous animal. At night the dishes looked up, and the stars looked down, and the wind moved through the metal trusses with a sound like breath trying to be patient. Dr. Myra Alvarez ran the project. She was small, sharp, and never warm, a woman who spoke in clean sentences and treated doubt like a personal failure. Mason Grady handled the back end, the pipelines, the code that turned the sky into numbers. He was my age, built like he still lifted weights out of habit, and he laughed too loud when the coffee hit. We had been here for months, sleeping in prefab rooms that smelled like hot plastic, taking turns watching the data stream, pretending we were not lonely. We were mapping the great void again, because new surveys had made old maps embarrassing. Every few years the universe got measured with a sharper ruler, and the rulers kept saying the same thing. There was a place in the constellation of Eridanus where galaxies were missing, not hidden behind dust, not too faint, just absent. The statistical models made it improbable, but the sky did not care about probability. For a long time the great void was treated like a trick of perspective. People argued about selection bias, about redshift errors, about the way human brains loved patterns. But then the microwave background showed a cold spot in the same direction, and the arguments got quieter. Cold and empty sat on top of each other like a bruise under skin. Our array listened in the band where neutral hydrogen whispered. The long wave line stretched by expansion until it sat deep in radio, a distant heartbeat of the early universe. Hydrogen was everywhere. It filled the spaces between galaxies. It threaded the cosmic web like fog. If the great void was truly empty, the hydrogen there would be thin. If it was not empty, if it hid something else, the line would warp. We listened. We stacked hours, then nights, then weeks, and we watched the spectrum like men watching a door that might open. The night I heard the chewing, the door opened, and something on the other side was already eating. I waited until Mason took the morning shift. Then I walked into the server room with the file on a thumb drive because old habits die hard. The racks breathed heat. Blue lights blinked like tired eyes. Mason sat with his feet on a spare chair, looking at a waterfall plot that flowed down his monitor in fresh colors. I told him we had interference in the void beam. I said it tasted like equipment trouble. Mason pulled the file, ran the filters, and made a face that tried to be casual. He did not hear the chewing at first, not the way I did. He listened like a programmer, not like someone who had spent years staring at waveforms until they started to look like faces. Then he rewound. He listened again. He sat up. He said the noise floor was wrong. He said the pattern was too structured. He said the timing drifted in a way that did not match the clock. He said it looked like something modulating the carrier, something tugging at the hydrogen line itself. He did not say it sounded like a mouth. He did not have my teeth. Dr. Alvarez came in after lunch, hair pinned tight, eyes already sharp. We played the audio render for her because sometimes the ear catches what the eye misses. The sound came out of the speakers flat and low, more vibration than noise, a slow grinding pulse that made the air feel thick. In the office the sound was softer, but I still felt it in my jaw, a pressure behind the molars like a bruise. Dr. Alvarez watched the plots instead of listening. She asked Mason for confidence intervals. She asked me what processing steps I had taken. She asked if I had changed the sampling or the windowing. She asked if the audio render had introduced artifacts. I answered and she nodded, and she did not touch her face, but I saw her tongue press against the inside of her teeth as if checking them. We agreed it was worth a dedicated run. The next week was a grind of long integrations and sleepless shifts. We aimed the dishes into the black region of Eridanus and listened longer than we were supposed to, pushing beyond the schedule, stealing time from other projects. The Great Void did not give us nothing. It gave us the same signal again and again, faint but persistent, a low cyclic pattern with irregular jolts, like a jaw hitting something harder than flesh. When we stacked the data, the pattern sharpened. Mason tried to fit it to known sources. Pulsars were too clean, too rhythmic. Quasars were too loud, too messy. Instrument noise did not line up across independent dishes, but the chewing did. Each antenna heard it with the same phase drift, as if the sky itself was moving under a slow, grinding tooth. Dr. Alvarez reached out to other teams. At first we got polite replies. People said the Great Void had always been weird. People said they had seen odd residuals. People said the cold spot in the microwave background was controversial. People said we should publish and let the community tear it apart. Then a graduate student in Chile sent a short message. He said his group had been using a different instrument, a high-altitude array for cosmic microwave background polarization. He said they had found something like a notch, a clean missing band, not just colder, but absent, like a section of the map had been scraped away. He said the edge was too sharp to be a fluctuation. He attached a plot. When Mason overlaid the plot direction with our radio beam, the notch sat inside the Great Void like a tongue pressed into an open wound. That was the first time Dr. Alvarez used the word cleaned. Not empty, she said, cleaned. A week later, the graduate student stopped answering emails. The Great Void had been treated as a statistical accident, but cleaning implies intent. Cleaning implies a hand or a mouth. We pulled every public dataset we could find. Galaxy surveys, lensing maps, X-ray catalogs. The Great Void was a hole in visible light, but it was also a hole in mass. Gravitational lensing around it showed less pull than there should have been. It was not that galaxies were hidden. The mass was not there to bend light. A true absence, like a tooth pulled from a jaw, but the edges were wrong. Cosmic filaments that should have threaded through the region stopped at the border and frayed. Their density profiles did not taper the way a natural void should. They ended as if cut, as if the web had been bitten through and the ends left to float, still bleeding gas and dark matter into nowhere. I stared at those maps late at night, and the shapes stopped looking like cosmology and started looking like bite marks. Dr. Alvarez insisted we stay disciplined. She made Mason build a model that could quantify what we were hearing, not as metaphor but as physics. He took the time series and ran it through every transform he knew, searching for periodicities, harmonics, hidden structure. The chewing was not random. It had a fundamental beat that drifted, slow at first, then faster in bursts, like a jaw that sometimes worked through soft matter and sometimes hit bone. The bursts lined up with faint flashes in the hydrogen line, tiny spikes of broadening and redshift, as if gas was being heated and thrown outward. Not like a supernova but like spray. When Mason said spray, my mouth filled with saliva. I started sleeping with my jaw clenched. I woke with tooth impressions stamped into my own tongue. The inside of my cheeks was raw. I blamed stress, caffeine, the dry air, anything human. I did not tell anyone that when the chewing file played, my teeth moved as if trying to match it. I held my jaw shut with my hand during the night shifts, and I pretended it was just fatigue. The facility had no real silence. Even when the array was parked, the servers hummed, the generators cycled, the air handlers pushed cold air through metal ducts. But between those mechanical sounds there was another layer that I began to notice, a low tremor that felt like pressure changes, like a stomach rumble in the walls. At first I thought it was the wind. Then the wind stopped and the tremor stayed. I went outside one night during my break. The sky was a hard bowl of stars. The dishes stood frozen in their rings, their pale faces tilted toward a patch of darkness that did not look darker than anywhere else to the naked eye. The great void was not a black hole on the sky. It was a subtle wrongness you could only see with the right instruments. And yet, standing there, I felt as if a piece of the sky was watching me with an open mouth. The tremor ran up through my boots. It was faint, but it was there, a vibration in the ground that did not match any known seismic pattern. The desert did not have earthquakes. The nearest highway was hours away. There was no reason for the earth to hum like that. I put my palm on the steel support of the nearest dish. The metal was cool. The vibration came through it like a pulse. I could count it, not with numbers but with the rhythm of my own breathing. Slow, slow, then a sudden double beat, then a pause that felt like a swallow. Back in the control room, I pulled the seismometer logs, because every facility has one even if no one looks. The graphs showed nothing dramatic, just a faint periodic wiggle that started the same night we first detected the chewing. It was synchronized across two instruments placed on opposite ends of the compound. The sky was making the ground vibrate. Dr. Alvarez did not like superstition. She did not like metaphors. But when I showed her the seismometer traces overlaying the radio waveform, her face lost a fraction of its control. The peaks lined up. She told us to keep it internal until we had confirmation. She told us to assume there was a mundane explanation. She told us to not spread panic. Mason said there was no mundane explanation that made the Earth hum in step with neutral hydrogen from a cosmic void. That night the chewing got louder. It did not increase in amplitude on the raw data, not in any way that could be blamed on equipment gain. It got louder in my head. The same waveform, the same power, but my perception shifted, as if my bones had become more sensitive. When the low grind came, my jaw vibrated. When the crack hit, it shot pain through my teeth like ice water. I went to the bathroom and spat into the sink, and the saliva was pink. The gums were bleeding. I stared at my reflection, at the thin line of blood between teeth, and I thought about the great void maps, the way filaments ended abruptly, the way the edge looked like a torn seam. I thought about cleaning. I thought about a mouth big enough to clean a region of space. Then the lights flickered, and for a second the mirror behind my face showed a darkness that was not the tiled wall. It was a curve, pale and wet, like the inside of a cheek. The light steadied, and the wall was a wall again. I rinsed my mouth until the water ran clear, and I did not look at the mirror a second time. In the morning, Dr. Alvarez announced we were adding another data set. She had pulled strings and favors and secured time on a gravitational wave detector feed, not the big public one everyone heard about, but a quieter network of torsion bar antennas used for low-frequency noise studies. They were sensitive to slow distortions, the kind of rumble that might show up if spacetime itself was being needed. The first overlay made Mason swear under his breath. The chewing was there too, not as a clean wave but as a series of pressure events, each one like a jaw closing, each one followed by a long relaxation, like tissue giving way. The events came from the same rough sky direction, and they drifted, not across our sky, but across the map of the universe as if the source was moving. Moving toward us. That was the moment the great void stopped being a curiosity and became a countdown. We started measuring the border the way a doctor measures a tumor. Not for beauty, not for understanding, but for growth. Mason took the galaxy catalog and the lensing maps and built a boundary curve in moving coordinates. He compared it to older catalogs, older maps, even the dusty records from decades ago when the Great Void was first argued over. He found differences. At first he assumed they were artifacts of different instruments, different selection functions. But the shifts were coherent. The edge in the newer data sat slightly farther out, not in one direction, but like a mouth that had opened wider. The change was small on the sky, but in volume it was obscene. Dr. Alvarez said the time between surveys was a blink in cosmology. The universe does not change that fast. If the edge was moving, then either our models were wrong, or the distance to the edge was wrong, or something was happening that did not belong to the rules we used to keep ourselves sane. She did not say the third option out loud, but it sat on the table with us like a knife. We increased the cadence. We used every instrument that could be pointed at that patch of space, every public feed, every private favor. We pulled drift scan data from a dish in Alaska. We pulled infrared counts from a satellite archive. We pulled gamma-ray background histograms from an old mission that had been dead for years. The Great Void did not light up. It did not fill in. It stayed empty and it stayed sharp, and in the deepest stacks there were hints of something that made my stomach tighten. A faint glow at the edge, not like stars, not like gas, more like dust lit from within. The spectrum was broad, smeared. Mason said it looked like thermal emission from cold grains. Dr. Alvarez said there should not be grains because grains come from galaxies, and galaxies were missing. The glow was strongest along a curve that matched the bite shape in the map. A crescent of faint warmth around a cold hole. When we rendered that glow into false color, the edge looked wet. Mason laughed once, a quick sound with no humor. He said that if he did not know better, he would call it drool. I did not laugh. The chewing audio became the key because humans are still animals, and animals trust the ear when the eye is unsure. We shifted the frequency scale down, then up, experimenting, trying to see if the pattern held at different render choices. It did. No matter how we mapped it, the structure remained. Slow grinding sequences, sudden cracks, long pauses that felt like swallowing. The pauses were the worst. In those gaps the noise floor dropped in a way that made the room feel like it was sinking. The universe went quiet as if holding its breath. Then the grinding returned and my teeth itched with relief. I caught myself tapping my fingers on the desk in time with it. One night Mason stayed after his shift, eyes red, jaw tight. He had been listening longer than anyone because he could not stop. He said the pattern was not just chewing, it was counting. He had found a repeating motif, a sequence of bites and pauses that returned at irregular intervals. When he mapped those intervals onto the distribution of galaxy masses in the region, the match was close enough to make him pale. He said the chewing had a menu. I told him to sleep. He told me he could not sleep because when he closed his eyes he saw the void edge like teeth, white and curved, closing on a web of light. He said he could feel it in his mouth, a phantom pressure like his jaw wanted to open wider than his face allowed. The next morning he came to breakfast late and his lips were split. Blood dried in the corners. He said the desert air was cracking him. He would not meet my eyes. I noticed he had started wearing a mouth guard. Dr. Alvarez called a meeting with the department heads back at the university. It was a video call, faces in little boxes, men and women in offices with books behind them. They smiled at first because the Great Void was a grant magnet because anomalies are good for careers. Then Dr. Alvarez shared the overlays, the map, the lensing deficit, the glow at the edge, the gravitational wave rumble. She played the audio. On the screen, one of the men flinched as if struck. Another leaned closer, hand on throat. A younger woman took her headphones off and rubbed her jaw. Dr. Alvarez did not use metaphors. She did not say chewing. She said we had detected a low-frequency modulation correlated across independent modalities, localized to the direction of the Great Void, consistent with a process removing mass and altering the metric. She said the void appears to be expanding. She said the data suggest it is not empty, it is cleared. Silence followed, and in that silence I heard the faintest hint of grinding, as if the call itself carried a residue. A man with a square haircut, someone from administration, said we should be careful about language. He said we should not anthropomorphize. He said the public would panic. He said we should route all communications through the university press office. Dr. Alvarez said we were past public relations. She said this was a physics problem, and physics does not care about headlines. The man said there were agencies that cared. That was when the call ended, not with goodbyes, but with a clean disconnect. After that, our email started bouncing. Our external access slowed. Files that had been public were suddenly unavailable. When Mason tried to pull a catalog from a European archive, the connection reset again and again, as if someone had put a hand on the line. Dr. Alvarez said it was probably just network congestion. Her voice did not believe it. 2 days later, a white SUV drove up the gravel road, and two men stepped out wearing plain clothes that were too neat. They had badges they showed fast. They asked for Dr. Alvarez. They did not look at the dishes. We watched through the control room glass as Dr. Alvarez spoke with them outside. Her posture stayed rigid. At one point she touched her teeth with her tongue, quick and unconscious. One of the men handed her a folder. Another pointed toward the horizon, toward the patch of sky that held the great void. Dr. Alvarez nodded once. When she came back in, she told us we were to stop sharing data externally. She told us we were to keep all recordings on local storage. She told us the project had become sensitive. Mason said sensitive was a polite word for dangerous. Dr. Alvarez did not correct him. That night I dreamed I was inside a mouth big as a canyon. The walls were pale and ridged, slick with saliva that smelled like cold iron. Above me, a ceiling of flesh pulsed with veins that carried starlight. Far ahead, a throat opened and closed like an elevator door, swallowing darkness. Teeth rose on both sides, not as individual points, but as continents of enamel, curved and cracked, each one a mountain of bone. Between them hung threads of light, galaxies stretched into strands, stuck like meat between molars. When the jaw closed, the thread snapped, and the sound was our audio file, magnified until it shook the dream apart. I woke biting down so hard my jaw popped, and the taste in my mouth was blood. In the bathroom, my gums had receded. The roots of my teeth showed more than they had before, raw and pale. I pressed my finger to them and felt a tenderness that went deeper than flesh. It felt like pressure from below, like something pushing upward. When I looked at the mirror, the wall behind my reflection was normal, and yet I could not shake the feeling that if I blinked at the wrong time, I would see the curve again. The great void was getting into us. We kept working because work is the only thing a person can do when fear becomes a constant. If you stop, your mind fills the empty space with images. The great void had plenty of empty space to offer. Dr. Alvarez set up a secure partition on the servers. Mason moved the raw feeds into an isolated machine with no network. The men in the white SUV returned twice, each time asking if we had found any new anomalies. Each time they left with copies of our latest maps. They never told us who they worked for, and Dr. Alvarez never asked again where the request came from. I watched them walk away with our data, and I thought about a mouth learning where to bite next. Mason built a visualization he called the jawline. It was a three-dimensional rendering of the void boundary, projected through cosmic distance into a shape that could be rotated on screen. The boundary was not a smooth sphere. It had curves and notches, scalloped arcs, grooves that repeated like the spacing of molars. When he colored the surface by the intensity of the edge glow, the brightest parts sat in the grooves, like saliva pooling between teeth. He made a second visualization, the crumbs. He took the faint thermal glow data and subtracted the expected background. What remained was a spray of tiny clumps beyond the edge, a halo of debris. He said it looked like crumbs thrown from a mouth. Dr. Alvarez told him to rename the files with neutral language. He did not. One afternoon, while the dishes tracked the great void, a minor fault alarm went off on dish 12. I went out with a toolbox because equipment always breaks at the worst times, and because walking outside felt better than staying in rooms with that sound. Dish 12 stood in the sun, white paint glaring. I climbed the ladder to the feed horn, checked the connectors, checked the seal. Everything looked fine. Then I saw the cable jacket. A section of black coax had been stripped, not by weathering, not by rodents, but by something that had shaved it clean. The outer layer was gone in a neat band, exposing the braided shield beneath. The edges of the cut were smooth, almost polished. I ran my finger along it and felt fine ridges like tiny scrape marks in parallel, like teeth. No animal out here could do that. Coyotes chew, they tear, they leave ragged ends. This was a clean bite. When I brought the cable back to the control room, Mason stared at it and swallowed hard. He said the cut spacing matched the modulation period we saw in the radio data. He said the ridges on the jacket lined up with the harmonics. He said the great void was chewing on our equipment. Dr. Alvarez told us to not be ridiculous. Her voice was thin. We replaced the cable and added cameras around the dish. That night, the cameras recorded nothing but darkness and the faint movement of stars. But the next morning the new cable had a similar band stripped, a different location, the same smooth cut. In the footage at the moment the cut happened, the camera feed glitched. A rectangle of the image went black for a fraction of a second, not like a dropout, more like a piece of the scene had been removed. When the image returned, the cable was bitten. We reviewed the footage frame by frame. In the black rectangle there was no noise, no compression artifacts, just absence. A clean void inside the frame. My skin prickled. It was the same absence we saw in the sky maps, scaled down and pasted into our camera. Dr. Alvarez ordered the cameras removed. She said we were inviting paranoia. Mason said we were inviting attention. That word, attention, sat in me like a splinter. I could not stop thinking about it. We were listening into a place that did not want to be listened to. We were converting its low frequency pressure into sound, then feeding it into our ears, into our bones, letting it vibrate our teeth. We were, in a way, tasting it. And if it was a mouth, then we were putting ourselves on its tongue. The chewing audio began to appear in places it should not. I heard it in the shower, in the rush of water through the pipes, a faint grind under the white noise. I heard it in the air handler, in the cyclical whine of the fan. I heard it in the refrigerator, in the compressor kick, a soft crack that made my jaw ache. Once, walking past the dishes at dusk, I heard it without any machine, a low rumble that seemed to come from the sky itself. The hair on my arm stood up. I looked up, and for a moment the stars over the great void looked dimmer, as if a thin film had been laid over them. The film shimmered, then was gone. I started carrying earplugs, not to block sound, but to block the feeling of my own teeth responding. The earplugs helped with the high frequencies. They did nothing for the chewing. That sound was not only in air, it was in structure, it was in my skull. Mason brought in a dental mirror he had bought online. He said he wanted to check his mouth for damage. He laughed as he said it, but the laugh died fast. He opened his mouth under the control room light and used the mirror to look at his molars. I watched because it was easier than looking at the void maps. His gums were swollen. Behind his last molar, in the soft tissue near the wisdom tooth area, a pale ridge showed through, like enamel just under the surface. It was not a tooth, not yet, but it had the smooth shine of something that wanted to be. Mason pressed it with the mirror tip and flinched. He said it hurt like a bruise. He said it felt like something growing. I went to my room and checked my own mouth. My gums had receded further. Between two teeth, high on the gum line, I saw a thin white seam, a line of hardness under flesh. I closed my mouth and swallowed. The motion felt like swallowing with a throat that was not mine. Dr. Alvarez did not show us her teeth. She worked later and later, eyes ringed with fatigue, mouth set hard. I caught her one night staring at a lensing map with her lips parted slightly, tongue moving behind her teeth in tiny pulses. It looked like she was chewing without food. She noticed me watching and closed her mouth. She told me to focus on my tasks. The tasks were becoming impossible because the data was changing faster. A new transient alert came in from an optical survey, a deep field in the same direction. A small cluster that had been present in the last stack was dimmer in the new one. The survey team had assumed a calibration issue, but the dimming was coherent across filters. Mason pulled the coordinates and overlaid them on our edge curve. The cluster sat right on the jawline like a piece of meat caught between teeth. That night, during our listening run, the chewing waveform produced a crack louder than any before, a sudden sharp spike that made my teeth sing with pain. At the same timestamp, the optical feed showed the cluster drop again, almost to nothing. It was not a supernova, not an occultation, not dust. It was removal. It was as if the light had nowhere to come from anymore. The crack in our audio file was the moment the universe lost a mouthful. We did not say that out loud. We did not need to. I watched Mason as he stared at the plots. His jaw moved in slow cycles. He had no food. He was chewing air. I wanted to leave. I wanted to drive until the dishes were a memory and the sky was just a sky again. But leaving felt like turning my back on a predator in tall grass. The great void was not a place you could outrun. Besides, I did not trust my teeth to stop humming if I left. Dr. Alvarez finally broke her own rule and reached outside our chain of command. She called an old friend, a theoretical physicist named Harlan Shaw, a man who had spent his career staring at equations until they became theology. He arrived 2 days later in a dusty sedan, hair uncombed, eyes bright with the wrong kind of excitement. He watched our presentations in silence. He listened to the audio file. When the grinding started, his hand went to his jaw as if checking that it was still attached. When the crack hit, he winced and smiled at the same time. He said it was beautiful. Dr. Alvarez asked him what he thought it was in plain words. Harlan said the simplest explanation was that something was removing matter from the region in a way that left no gravitational residue. Not a black hole because black holes keep mass. Not dust because dust still bends light. Not a selection effect. A true subtraction. He said subtraction on that scale required exotic physics. He said there were a few options. He talked about vacuum decay, a phase transition bubble that could sweep through the universe at nearly the speed of light, converting our laws into something else. He said if that was happening, we would be dead before we knew it, because the bubble wall would erase not just matter but the concept of matter. Dr. Alvarez said we were still alive. Harlan said that meant it was not vacuum decay, or at least not the kind the textbooks described. He talked about brains, about higher dimensions, about our universe as a surface, a skin stretched in a space we could not perceive. He said on such a surface, holes could be made not by internal forces but by something outside, something that treated the brain like tissue. He said imagine a flat sheet of meat and something above it taking a bite. The bite would be a region where the sheet was gone. The edges would be sharp. The meat fibers would fray. There would be residue beyond the edge, scraps thrown outward. To the meat itself, the bite would look like an expanding void because the tissue would recoil, because tension would pull the edges. Dr. Alvarez did not like metaphors. Harlan used them anyway because fear needs pictures. Mason asked if the chewing sound fit that model. Harlan said if something outside our universe was interacting with the brain, the interaction could excite modes in the brain, ripples, vibrations. Those ripples could couple to our fields, to our instruments, even to our bodies because we are made of the same sheet. He said we were hearing the sheet vibrate as it was being worked. He said the sound could be, in a sense, the universe screaming, but in a way that sounded like chewing because we are interpreting it through our own biology. He asked if any of us had dental pain. No one answered. That night after Harlan was given a spare room, I found him in the control room alone, staring at the jawline model. The lights were low and the monitors painted his face in blue. He was chewing on nothing, slow and steady, as if tasting the air. He said the edge was too regular to be random. He said the grooves looked like teeth. He said nature rarely makes teeth. Teeth are tools. Teeth imply a feeder. He asked if we had considered that the great void might not be a wound in the universe, but a mouthprint left by something that eats universes. I told him that was not a comforting thought. He nodded and said comfort was a local phenomenon. Harlan wanted to test a hypothesis. He said if we were hearing vibrations induced by an external interaction, there might be a response if we pushed back. He said we should transmit into the void, not with random noise but with the chewing waveform itself, inverted as if applying a cancellation tone. Dr. Alvarez refused at first. She said we did not know what we were dealing with. She said transmitting could be like tapping a shark on the nose. Harlan said we were already swimming in its mouth. Mason, who had been silent, said he wanted to try. His eyes looked hungry. I hated the idea, but part of me wanted proof, because proof would give shape to the fear. Proof would be a handle. We built the transmission chain over 2 days. We used a spare dish, isolated, pointed at the great void. Mason generated an inverted waveform, a phase-flipped version of the chewing signal, stretched back into radio frequencies. It was like taking the sound of a mouth and turning it into a beam. On the third night, under a sky that felt too close, we transmitted. The dish moved with a mechanical grace and locked onto the coordinates. The transmitter ramped up. The monitors showed a clean power output. The beam left Earth and headed into a region where thousands of galaxies had been erased. For a minute, nothing happened. Then the seismometer line jumped. A slow swell rose in the ground vibration, then a sudden sharp spike. The lights in the control room dimmed. The air felt thick, as if humidity had arrived in the desert from nowhere. My teeth buzzed hard enough to make my vision shimmer. Mason shouted something, but I could not hear his words over the grinding that rose in my skull. The chewing sound, the real chewing, surged in amplitude on the live feed. It was no longer a faint pattern buried in static. It was dominant, a low roar of wet pressure, a jaw working close. The monitors flickered, and for a fraction of a second the jawline model on screen changed. The edge moved. Not by a small survey difference, but by a visible lurch, as if the mouth had taken a fresh bite. Harlan laughed, high and thin, and the sound made my stomach twist. He said it hurt us. Dr. Alvarez hit the shutdown. The transmitter power dropped. The dish stopped. The control room lights steadied. The chewing did not. It continued at the new level for another minute, then slowly sank back into its old faint pattern, like a mouth settling after noticing a taste. We had tapped the shark. After that night, the great void felt closer, not in distance, but in intimacy. The sky over the dishes looked the same, but the air tasted metallic, and my tongue kept finding the raw seam on my gums. The seam had hardened. When I pressed it, I felt a tooth-shaped ridge beneath. I started dreaming of biting. Not being bitten. Biting. In the dreams, I stood at the edge of a black sea, and my mouth opened wider than my head, wider than my body, wider than any human anatomy. The jaw hinged down until it touched the ground. Teeth rose in rows, countless, smooth and sharp, and beyond them was the great void, waiting like a plate. I woke with my hands at my mouth, fingers pressing my cheeks as if trying to keep the jaw closed. In the morning, Mason did not come to shift change. I went to his room. The door was unlocked. His bed was made too neat. On the desk lay his mouth guard, cracked in two. On the floor were small white fragments. Teeth. At first I thought he had dropped them. Then I saw the blood trail, thin and dark, leading from the desk to the bathroom. The bathroom sink was full of water, reddish and cloudy. The mirror above it was fogged, as if someone had been breathing hard. On the counter were more white fragments, arranged in a line like a ridge. I leaned closer and saw that the fragments were not broken teeth. They were new teeth, tiny, perfect, each one shaped like a small triangular molar, each one slick with blood. Dozens of them, as if Mason had been spitting up a second jaw. The toilet bowl held more, floating like pale fish. I called his name. No answer. In the shower, the curtain was pulled back. The tiles were clean. The drain was clogged with something pale and stringy, like gum tissue, like connective fiber. Mason was gone. There was no sign of struggle, no smashed furniture, no forced entry. Just teeth and blood and absence. The security cameras showed Mason leaving his room at 3 in the morning. He walked outside barefoot, wearing only shorts. He moved like a sleepwalker. His head was tilted up, mouth open. He walked toward dish 12, the one with the bitten cables. At the base of the dish, he stopped. He put both hands on the steel support and leaned his forehead against it. For a minute he stayed still, breathing. Then the footage glitched. A rectangle of the image went black, clean absence. It covered Mason and the lower half of the dish. When the image returned, Mason was gone. The dish was still there, but a section of its support beam had been shaved smooth. A band of missing paint, missing metal, as if something had taken a bite out of steel. Dr. Alvarez watched the footage without blinking. When it ended, she closed her eyes and swallowed. Her throat moved like a swallow in our audio file. Harlan said we should call the authorities. Dr. Alvarez said the authorities were already here, and they did not want noise. That afternoon, the white SUV returned, and this time there were 3 vehicles. Men moved through the facility, polite but firm, asking questions, taking statements, taking drives. They told us Mason had left the premises. They said he was probably confused, stressed. They said we should rest. They did not look at the teeth. When they left, Dr. Alvarez locked the doors and told us we were not going anywhere. She said if Mason had been taken, then leaving would not make us safe. She said the only chance we had was understanding. Harlan agreed. I sat at my console that night, staring at the live feed from the Great Void, and I realized I was trapped in a room full of ears, listening to a mouth that had noticed us. The chewing pattern continued, steady, patient. In the pauses between bites, I could swear I heard something else, a subtle rhythm beneath the noise, like breathing through a nose, like something smelling. After Mason vanished, sleep became a thing we did in short, frightened bursts. The facility felt infected. Every shadow seemed like a missing piece. Every camera glitch made my stomach drop. I began to look at objects and imagine how they would feel if a chunk of them was simply absent, not broken, not removed, but never there. Harlan worked like a man trying to outrun his own mind. He filled a whiteboard with diagrams of brains and boundaries, drawing curves that looked too much like jaws. He talked about tension in the cosmic sheet, about how a bite would cause recoil and relaxation. He said the chewing sound might be the sheet oscillating as the bite closed and opened, like tissue being worked between teeth. Dr. Alvarez focused on data. She refused to talk about Mason unless forced. When she did speak of him, she said his disappearance was an unfortunate incident. Her mouth did not form the word death. I watched her hands as she typed. Her fingers were steady. But sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, her jaw moved. The men in the SUVs had not returned, but their presence hung over us. Our phones had no signal. The internet feed was cut. We were alone with our dishes and our hunger sound. On the fourth night after Mason, the chewing pattern changed. It added a new layer, a higher frequency rasp that sat atop the grind like teeth scraping enamel. When we rendered it into audio, it sounded like a tongue moving across ridges, tasting. The rasp came in bursts that aligned with our own internal processes. I noticed it most when I swallowed, when I shifted in my chair, when I breathed in a little deeper. It was as if the signal was syncing to us, learning our rhythms. Harlan said the system was adapting. Dr. Alvarez said we were projecting. Then Harlan opened his mouth and showed us his gums. Behind his lower incisors, the tissue had thickened into a pale ridge. Not swollen, not inflamed, but structured as if cartilage had reorganized. The ridge had tiny bumps along it like tooth buds. Harlan said he had felt it for days. He said it itched. He said when he pressed it with his tongue, he could feel it harden. He said the universe was growing teeth in him. Dr. Alvarez stared, and for the first time I saw fear crack her composure. She did not speak. She simply closed her laptop and walked to her office and shut the door. That night I lay in bed with my hands on my jaw. I felt my own gums with my tongue. The seam had become a knot. A hard nub pressed into the inside of my cheek. It was like a wisdom tooth coming in, but in the wrong place, a tooth trying to bloom where it did not belong. I thought about Mason, about the tiny, perfect teeth in his sink. I imagined them growing, multiplying, forming a second mouth in his throat, then a third. I imagined the moment he leaned on the dish and the camera glitched, a rectangle of clean absence covering him, and I wondered if the absence had opened inside his mouth first. I did not sleep. We ran the array nonstop because stopping felt like giving up eyes. If something was chewing the universe, we wanted to know how close. The next afternoon, a storm rolled in, fast and wrong. The desert usually gives you warning, a line of clouds far off, a slow buildup. This storm arrived like it had been dropped from above. The sky turned bruised. Wind slammed the dishes with grit. The control room lights flickered. Static rose in every channel. Radio interference. Power sag. The generators kicked harder. The chewing waveform became harder to isolate, buried under wind noise and electrical spikes. I went outside to check the dish locks and felt the air change around me. The wind smelled wet like a mouth. Sand hit my face like needles. The dishes creaked as they fought the gusts. Then the wind stopped, dead calm in an instant. The sudden silence was, the sky over the great void darkened, not with cloud, not with night, but with absence. A patch of sky the size of a handprint simply lost its stars. It was not a shadow, it was a missing section. The edges were sharp. I stood under it, unable to breathe. The dark patch pulsed once slow. The pulse ran through my chest like a pressure wave. My teeth clicked together involuntarily. In the pause after the pulse, I heard chewing without headphones. I heard it in the air, low and wet, like a giant tongue moving. The dark patch did not move across the sky like a cloud. It expanded outward by a small amount, then held. Then, as if satisfied, it shrank back and the stars returned, but not all of them. The pattern was slightly changed. A small cluster of faint points was gone, leaving a hole in the star field that my brain kept trying to fill. I ran back inside. Dr. Alvarez was already in the control room, eyes on the monitors. The seismometer line had spiked. The gravitational wave feed showed a heavy event, a slow shear like a jaw flexing. The radio data had saturated for a moment, the chewing waveform overwhelming the system. Harlan said it had surfaced. Dr. Alvarez said it was a local atmospheric effect, but her voice shook just a little. The storm resumed after, wind returning as if nothing had happened. But the dishes were not the same. On dish 5, a section of the rim was missing, not bent, not broken, just gone, a clean bite out of the metal ring. The paint ended, the missing arc matched the curvature in our jawline model. Now the great void had a tooth mark on Earth. We shut down operations for safety, but the chewing did not stop in our heads. In the quiet control room with the servers powered down, I still felt the grind in my jaw. I walked to the break room and heard it in the refrigerator hum. I went to the bathroom and heard it in the water pipes. I pressed my ear to the wall and heard. The building itself was chewing or being chewed. Harlan said the brain interaction was no longer confined to the distant void. He said the boundary might be intersecting our local region like a mouth pressing through a sheet. He said our instruments, tuned to the... He did not finish the sentence. His lips moved as if tasting a word, then he swallowed. Dr. Alvarez came out of her office and told us we were leaving. She said this facility was no longer secure. She said we would pack the drives, the notebooks, the raw data and drive to the nearest town, then to the university. She said we would put people between us and this place, as if bodies could serve as walls against a cosmic mouth. I agreed because I wanted to. We loaded equipment into cases. We wrapped drives in foil. We put the chewing files onto redundant storage because that is what we do with evidence. Harlan insisted we should destroy the audio. He said it might be a kind of lure. He said playing it might feed it or teach it. Dr. Alvarez refused. She said knowledge was our only weapon. As we carried the cases, I felt my gums throb. The nub in my cheek pressed harder. I tasted blood. At dusk, we stood in the parking lot beside our vehicles. The storm clouds had thinned. The sky was clearing. The dishes sat, then the chewing sound hit us like a wave. Not through speakers, not through headphones, but through our bodies. The ground trembled, the air thickened. My teeth clicked hard enough to chip. Pain shot through my jaw. In front of us over the dish field, a rectangle of clean absence opened in midair. It was the same black as the camera glitches, but bigger, and it had depth, not just void, but a sense of volume, like a hole punched through reality. The edges were wet. A pale curve moved inside, slow, like a lip, like flesh. Harlan whispered something, a prayer or a theorem, I could not tell. Dr. Alvarez stepped back, eyes wide, hands tight on the drive case. The rectangle pulsed and the chewing began, loud enough to make my vision blur. The dishes, outward metal shaved clean in arcs, bolts gone, paint stripped, sections removed as if bitten away by invisible teeth. The sound matched the removal. Grind, crack, swallow. We watched our array get eaten in front of us, and there was nothing we could do but listen. Then the rectangle closed, cleanly, like an eyelid, and the air snapped back, leaving only wind, and, on the field, half the dishes were missing. Not toppled, not broken, missing. Concrete pads stood empty. Metal fragments were not scattered. The space where the dishes had been was clean, as if they had never existed. Dr. Alvarez dropped the drive case. Her mouth opened, and for a moment I thought she would scream, but no sound came. She just chewed, slow, empty, as tears ran down her face. Harlan said we were next. He was right. We ran to the vehicles. Dr. Alvarez grabbed the drive case again with shaking hands. Harlan climbed into the back seat of the SUV we used for sight errands. I drove because my hands were steady by habit, even when my mouth was not. The engine started. Gravel spat under tires. We left the dish field behind, half eaten, the remaining dishes standing like broken teeth in a jaw. As we rolled down the access road, I looked in the rear-view mirror. Over the facility, the sky held a faint dark smear like a shadow on film. It pulsed once, slow. The pulse made the mirror vibrate. Dr. Alvarez sat rigid beside me, hugging the drive case to her chest like a child. Her jaw worked slow, chewing nothing. Blood ran from the corner of her mouth. She did not wipe it. Harlan in the back seat kept whispering, low and fast. I caught words like boundary, coupling, membrane. His voice sounded like a man reciting a recipe as the kitchen burns. The road out of Whetstone ran straight for miles through scrub and rock. The storm had passed, leaving the air unnaturally clear. The stars were coming out early, pricked in a deepening blue. Normally that view would have calmed me. That night each star looked like a tooth I could not trust. We had driven less than 10 minutes when the first bite appeared on the road. It was not a pothole. It was not a washout. It was a clean semicircle of missing asphalt, as if a giant cookie cutter had taken a mouthful. The edges were smooth. The gravel beneath was gone too, down to hard bedrock that had a polished shine. No debris, no cracks, just absence. I hit the brakes. The SUV skidded, tires squealing, but the sound was swallowed by the grinding that rose in my skull. For a moment the air felt thick again, like saliva. Harlan said, "Do not stop." Dr. Alvarez said, "Keep driving." There was no way around. The bite spanned the whole width of the road and extended into the desert on both sides, a chunk of earth removed clean. The hole was not deep in the way a pit is deep. It was deep in the way a missing page is deep. I could not see bottom because bottom did not apply. The hole was a break in continuity. I could see the far side of the road beyond it, intact. It was like reality had been edited. I turned the wheel and drove off the asphalt onto the scrub. The tires bounced over rocks. The SUV tilted, dust rose. My mouth tasted grit and blood. For a moment we drove parallel to the hole. The edge of absence ran beside us like a wall. Up close, the edge shimmered not with light but with a faint wavering that made my eyes water. It was like staring at heat haze but cold. If I focused on it too long, my teeth buzzed. Then, with no warning, the hole expanded. It took another bite out of the desert, extending toward us by a few yards. The new edge appeared not by tearing but by immediate completion, a new smooth boundary that made the old boundary look as if it had always been there. The bite was happening now. I swerved farther away, heart hammering. In the mirror, the hole seemed to be moving not by sliding but by stepping, bite by bite. The chewing in my head matched each step. Harlan said the interaction front was intersecting the local brain. He said we were inside the mouthprint now, inside the zone where the outside could reach through. Dr. Alvarez asked how to stop it. Harlan said, "You do not stop a mouth, you only stop being food." Dr. Alvarez said we were not food. Harlan said everything is food to something. We drove hard, bouncing through scrub, aiming for the faint glow of a distant highway. The SUV shook. The drive case rattled. My jaw, on the horizon, the stars changed. A section of the night sky dimmed, not from cloud but from missing points. A dark crescent formed, faint at first, then sharper. It was like a smile cut into the star field, a curve of emptiness that did not belong. The curve grew, slow and steady, as we watched. Dr. Alvarez whispered the great void. Harlan said no, this was closer. I could not take my eyes off it. The crescent looked like the boundary in our maps, scaled to naked sight. The great void had been far away in. My teeth clicked. The SUV engine stumbled. The dashboard lights flickered. The radio crackled and then, without anyone turning it on, the speaker filled with grinding. The chewing, loud, close, wet. I reached to shut the radio off. The knob did nothing. The grinding continued, and beneath it I heard another sound, a faint wet inhale like breath drawing in through a. Dr. Alvarez slammed her hand onto the radio, hard enough to bruise. The grinding stopped for a second, then returned, louder. The speaker cone vibrated so hard it tore. Harlan laughed, a thin sound. He said it was in the electrical noise and the thermal motion of electrons. He said it did not need our instruments anymore. It could vibrate anything. The crescent in the sky pulsed. The road ahead, the real highway, disappeared. Not the whole road, but a chunk of it, a bite taken out of the horizon line. The headlights. I swore, but I did not use the word. I just breathed it out through clenched teeth. I yanked the wheel and the SUV spun, tires carving dust, and for a moment we were aimed back toward the facility. Then I corrected, aiming away from the sky crescent, away from the growing dark. The SUV bounced over a rocky wash and the undercarriage scraped. The scrape sound turned into grinding in my head. Every friction noise became chewing. Dr. Alvarez screamed then, finally, not with her voice but with her eyes. She pointed at her hand. Her fingers had bite marks. Not wounds, not cuts, but missing arcs, semicircles of flesh removed clean. The edges were smooth. There was no blood at first, then a thin line appeared, delayed, as if the body had to remember how to bleed. She stared at the missing flesh as if it was. Harlan reached for her hand, then pulled back. He said, "Do not touch the edge." He said the edge was not a surface, it was a boundary of reality, and touching it could invite it. Dr. Alvarez laughed once, a short broken sound, then she chewed. I looked at my own hands on the steering wheel. My knuckles were intact, but my gums throbbed harder. The nub in my cheek had sharpened. When my tongue brushed it, it felt like enamel. Harlan said it was making us into mouths. He said it was giving the tissue tools, teeth, ridges, a way to couple. He said it was like the brain was being instructed how to be bitten. He said the bite was teaching. We drove until the fuel gauge dropped and the engine began to sputter. The SUV had been built for sight trips, not for off-road flight. We had no spare fuel. We had no cell signal. We had only the stars, and now the stars were unreliable. We found a small service building near an old pipeline, a concrete blockhouse with a metal door and no windows. It was meant for maintenance crews. It looked like shelter. We slammed the door and bolted it. We sat in the dark with flashlights and the drive case between us, like a sacred object. The air inside smelled of rust and old oil. Outside, the desert wind had died. Silence pressed against the concrete. In that silence I heard chewing again, faint but present, like a mouse gnawing in the walls. The concrete vibrated in slow pulses. Dust drifted from the ceiling with each pulse. The pulses matched the chewing waveform we had first heard in the array, but now they were not data. They were. Dr. Alvarez whispered that this was impossible. Harlan whispered that physics was a story we tell inside a larger mouth. We waited. Time in the blockhouse was elastic. Minutes felt like hours, then hours felt like nothing. We listened to our own breathing, and in the gaps we heard another breathing, slow and wet. At some point, Dr. Alvarez opened the drive case and took out one of the storage units. She held it as if it could burn her. She said the data was dangerous. She said the audio was a lure. She said we should destroy it. Harlan said it was already in us. Dr. Alvarez said then we should cut out our tongues. No one laughed. Harlan told us about an old thought experiment. He said, imagine you are a character in a book and someone outside the book takes a bite out of the pages. The character would see a blank hole, an absence where letters should be. The character might hear a rustle as paper tears. The character could not reach the hand. He said the great void was a hole in the pages of the universe. Dr. Alvarez said then the chewing sound was the rustle. Harlan said maybe. Or maybe the chewing was the sound the reader makes as he eats the paper. Dr. Alvarez asked why we could hear it. Harlan said because the bite took not only matter but information, and when information is removed, the boundary rings like a bell, like a plate. He said we were hearing the ringing of erased structure. He paused, then said maybe we were hearing the eater because the eater was not outside sound, it was outside causality, and its motions dragged our sheet in ways that became audible when translated by our instruments. He said we were lucky. Dr. Alvarez asked why. Harlan said because hearing it meant we were still on a page that existed. The blockhouse shook. A slow pressure wave passed through, making the metal door. Through the crack under the door, a line of darkness seeped in. It was not shadow. It was not night. It was absence, a thin blade of black that cut across the floor. The line moved slow like a tongue sliding along concrete. Dr. Alvarez pulled her feet back as if from fire. Harlan leaned forward. The line paused. It pulsed. My teeth clicked. The chewing sound rose loud in my skull, and beneath it I heard a soft wet inhale as if something. Then the line widened into a rectangle. The rectangle was the same clean black we had seen on the camera glitches. It opened on the floor like a trapdoor into nothing. The edges were smooth. The air above it felt cold and wet like breath. Inside the rectangle I could see nothing at first. Then a pale curve moved slow, pressing up as if something beneath was testing the boundary. The curve looked like flesh. It pressed harder. The concrete around the rectangle creaked, not breaking but flexing as if the building was a sheet being pulled. Harlan said, "Do not look directly," but his eyes were locked. Dr. Alvarez backed against the wall, clutching the drive case. I stared because I could not stop. The pale curve rose through the rectangle and I saw texture, fine ridges glistening, a tongue. A tongue the size of a car, pale and wet, moving with slow curiosity. It ran along the edge of the rectangle as if tasting it. Each time it touched the boundary, my gums throbbed as if my own mouth was being stroked. The tongue paused, then pressed upward and the rectangle expanded. Above the tongue, in the darkness beyond, something white loomed, curved and hard. A tooth. The tooth moved, and as it moved the chewing sound surged and the building shook and dust rained down and my mind filled with an image from my dreams, teeth like continents, galaxies like strands of meat. Dr. Alvarez screamed silently again, tears streaming. Harlan whispered that it was here. The tooth. A bite closed. Not on the building, not on us, but on the space between. The rectangle snapped smaller like a mouth closing and a chunk of the floor beside it vanished, clean bite out of concrete. The bite was close enough that I felt the pressure in my own jaw. The nub in my cheek cracked through the gum, a sharp point of enamel rising. Blood filled my mouth. I tasted the universe. Harlan reached out, hand trembling, and touched the edge of the rectangle. His fingers did not get cut. They disappeared. Not torn, not burned, gone. His hand followed, then his wrist. He made a sound, not a scream, because the air in his chest vanished as he did. His body tilted forward as if pulled by gravity, but it was not gravity, it was consumption. He slid into the rectangle without resistance, like meat into a mouth. For a moment his face was visible in the black, lit by our flashlight, eyes wide, mouth open in silent chewing. Then the rectangle pulsed and he was gone. Dr. Alvarez dropped the drive case and ran for the door, but the darkness line had already reached it, cutting under, widening. The door frame shimmered, and for a moment I saw the metal door as if it were made of paper. The chewing rose to a roar. I did not run. I could not. My mouth was full of blood and new tooth, and my jaw was moving on its own, chewing air in time with the signal. The rectangle on the floor expanded again, and the tongue rose higher, swaying, tasting. Turned toward me, not with eyes but with intention. I felt it inside my teeth, a pull like a craving. Dr. Alvarez screamed with her voice this time, a raw sound, but it did not carry. The air thickened, wet, and the sound became muffled, swallowed. She reached the door and yanked it, but the bolt was gone, eaten. The handle was gone. Her fingers grasped at nothing. She looked down and saw the missing metal, and the rectangle pulsed. A new bite appeared in her shoulder, a clean arc of missing flesh. She stumbled. Another bite took a chunk from her thigh. She fell, leaving no blood on the floor where the flesh was absent. She tried to crawl away, but the ground beneath her was becoming holes, bite by bite. Her mouth worked. Her teeth clicked. She chewed as if I watched her face change. The skin around her jaw tightened. Her cheeks bulged. Her lips stretched. In the dim light I saw pale ridges pressing from inside her gums, teeth trying to emerge. The universe was. She opened her mouth wide, wider than a human should, and inside I saw rows of small new teeth, dozens, budding and sharp, crowding her tongue. She made a sound that was half sob, half grind. Then the floor under her vanished in a clean semicircle and she slid toward the rectangle, dragged by the angle of absence as if the mouth had tilted the page. She reached for the drive case. Her fingers wrapped it. She clutched it and chewed, eyes locked on me, not pleading but instructing. I understood without words. Do not let it have the data. Do not let it taste itself through us. I grabbed the drive case. Blood dripped from my mouth onto my hands. My new tooth scraped my tongue. Pain shot through my jaw. Dr. Alvarez slid past me, legs gone where bites had taken them, torso dragging. Her mouth, the rectangle opened wide and the tongue rose and wrapped around her, slick, gentle, like a hand. It pulled her in. The last thing I saw was her eyes, wide and wet, reflecting the pale tooth above. Then she vanished into blackness, eaten clean. The rectangle, silence fell, not peaceful silence, a silence that felt like a page without ink. The chewing stopped and the sudden absence of it made my ears ring. I was alone in the blockhouse, alone with a drive case and blood and a tooth that did not belong. The rectangle on the floor had closed. The line of darkness under the door was gone. The building was still there, but pieces were missing, semicircles cut from floor and wall as if a bored child had taken bites out of a cardboard box. Outside, wind had returned, but it sounded wrong, like breath through teeth. I sat down hard, shaking. I tried to stop chewing, but my jaw kept moving, slow and steady, as if it remembered the rhythm. I opened the drive case and stared at the storage units. The chewing audio files were in there. The maps. The proof. If Harlan was right, the data itself might be a coupling, a pattern that linked our minds to the mouth. Maybe the eater did not hear our voices, but it heard the structure we had extracted, the waveform that matched its own motion. By playing it back, by transmitting it, we had made a bridge. I thought about the first time I had listened alone, the way the sound had leaned closer to me. I thought about the camera glitches, the rectangle of absence, the bite on cables. The mouth had been testing its teeth on our world, using the pattern as a guide. If the data was a lure, then keeping it was feeding. I decided to destroy it. My hands shook as I removed the storage units. I had no hammer, no fire. I had only my own teeth, and the irony made me want to retch. In the corner of the blockhouse was a metal tool rack, old and rusted. I found a heavy wrench. I placed the first storage unit on the concrete floor and raised the wrench. My jaw chewed slow. I brought the wrench down. The unit cracked, plastic split. A small board inside snapped. Tiny fragments scattered. It felt good, like breaking a toothpick stuck between molars. I smashed the second, then the third, then all of them until the floor was littered with broken plastic and silicon chips. When the last one broke, the chewing in my head returned, faint, angry, like a mouth noticing its food had been stolen. The blockhouse trembled. I froze, wrench in hand, blood drying on my lips. On the broken fragments, a shadow passed. Not a shadow from a flashlight. A shadow that did not respect angles. A rectangle of absence opened above the debris, hovering inches above the floor. It was smaller than before, no tongue visible, but it pulsed with intention. The rectangle drifted toward the broken storage units, as if sniffing. When it passed over one of the fragment vanished, eaten clean, and the chewing in my head softened, satisfied. It wanted the data, even in pieces. It was not after me, not yet. It was after the pattern. I grabbed the broken fragments and shoved them into my pockets, into my shirt, into anything. I ran out of the blockhouse into the desert night, carrying crumbs like a man fleeing with meat while a predator hunts by scent. The sky above was wrong. The crescent of emptiness had grown. It took up a swath of stars, a curve like a jawline, and beneath it the Milky Way band had a notch, a missing bite out of the river of light. I ran anyway. The desert stretched endless, but now it felt like a thin skin over something hungry. Every step sent vibration up my legs. Every breath tasted metallic. Behind me, the blockhouse shuddered. A low grinding rose, not from inside my head, but from the air itself, a rumble that rolled across the sand. The mouth was chewing closer. I ran until my lungs burned and my jaw ached from involuntary movement. The new tooth in my cheek scraped my tongue raw. Blood kept filling my mouth. I swallowed it and felt the warm iron slide down my throat, and for a moment it felt like feeding something inside me. I stumbled and fell in the sand. The broken fragments in my pockets dug into my skin. I lay there panting, staring up at the sky. The crescent pulsed. Stars winked out along its edge, bite by bite. In the silence between pulses, I heard faint grinding, and I realized it was not just sound. It was motion, a jaw closing somewhere above, pressing through the universe. Harlan had said we were pages in a book. I looked at the crescent and saw the curve of a tooth. I understood something then, something that made my stomach go cold. The great void was not far away. The great void was a hole that had been bitten out of our universe, and we had been looking at it through time, thinking distance meant safety. But the mouth that made it was not limited by our time. The mouth was outside. The chewing sound we heard was not delayed light from the past. It was the vibration of the page now, as the reader ate it now. We had heard it because the bite was still happening. We had heard it because the eater was still chewing. and now under this crescent I could feel the page bend. The sand under me vibrated. A rectangle of absence opened beside my head, clean black, a small bite mark in the air. It pulsed once. My jaw clicked. I could smell it, a wet cold smell like the inside of a mouth. I rolled away, scrambling to my feet. The rectangle followed, not chasing like a predator on legs, but appearing where it wanted, bite by bite, cutting away the space between us. Each time it pulsed, a semicircle of sand vanished, leaving a smooth hollow. I ran again, but I knew it was pointless. You cannot outrun a thing that can remove distance by consuming the page. I fell again, tripping over a rock that should not have been there because the universe was editing itself under my feet. This time when I hit the ground, my mouth opened wide and did not close. The muscles locked. My jaw strained. Pain flared in the hinge, then went numb. I felt the skin of my cheeks stretch. I felt my gums swell. The new tooth in my cheek grew, pushing out cracking flesh, emerging as a small sharp molar on the inside of my mouth. More teeth budded along my gums, tiny points rising, itching, hardening. The chewing in my head synced to my jaw and my jaw synced to it. I was becoming an instrument. The rectangle of absence hovered above me now, like a shadow of a mouth. It pulsed, and the air thickened. In the blackness beyond, I saw the pale curve of tongue again, moving slow, tasting. It touched the edge of the rectangle, and the vibration in my teeth became pleasure and terror at once, as if my body recognized the motion as its own. I realized then that it was not only eating matter. It was teaching the matter it touched to become mouth-like, to participate in the eating, to carry the rhythm forward. It was turning parts of the page into its own teeth. The tongue moved closer. I tried to scream, but my mouth only chewed. The tongue touched my lips. The touch was cold and wet. It slid over my mouth, pressing into the new teeth, and for a moment I tasted something that was not flesh, not saliva, but distant starlight, cold and dry, like dust from a galaxy that had been ground to nothing. The tongue withdrew, and the rectangle pulsed. A bite closed around my lower legs. They vanished from the knees down, clean absence, no pain at first, then a delayed burning as my nerves tried to find tissue that no longer existed. I stared at the smooth edge of my own missing legs, and my mind broke for a moment because the human brain cannot accept clean subtraction. Blood did not pour. Blood seeped in a thin line as if the universe was reluctant to let me stain its page. The chewing in my jaw continued. The rectangle pulsed again. This time the bite took my left hand. My fingers vanished, then my palm, leaving a smooth edge at the wrist. The broken data fragments spilled from the ruined pocket of my shirt into the sand, and as they hit the ground, the rectangle drifted toward them. It was still after the pattern. I understood dimly that if I let it have the fragments, it might ignore the rest of me for a moment, like throwing meat to distract a dog. I grabbed a handful of fragments with my remaining hand and threw them toward the rectangle. The rectangle pulsed and the fragments vanished. The chewing sound softened. I laughed, a wet bubbling sound, because the idea of negotiating with a universe eater using broken USB pieces was absurd, and absurdity is all the human mind has when the rules are gone. The rectangle pulsed again, and this time it took my laughter, cutting the air so that the sound died in my throat. The tongue came down one more time. It pressed into my mouth, forcing my jaw open wider, stretching my cheeks until they tore. The new teeth scraped against it, and the tongue bled, or something like bleeding, a thin film of dark light that tasted like burned copper. The tongue withdrew, and the tooth above, the huge white curve, lowered. I saw it clearly now, not as dream metaphor, but as physical presence. Enamel the size of a cliff. Fine cracks like river valleys. Stains of dark where, between the tooth and the tongue, hung strands of light, thin and trembling, galaxies stretched into fibers, stuck like meat between molars. They snapped as the tooth moved, and each snap was a crack in our chewing audio, each snap a lost cluster, a lost history. I saw our own world as one of those strands, thin, fragile, trembling. The tooth closed, darkness, pressure, grinding. For a moment I was inside it, inside the mouth, and I understood that the great void was not a place. It was a bite scar, and our instruments had been microphones pressed against a jaw. The chewing was everywhere, a cosmic mastication, slow and patient, methodical. Then in the middle of the grinding there was a pause. In that pause I felt something like a tension, not human, not even animal, something vast and simple, a hunger. It noticed the pattern in me, the way my jaw moved, the way my teeth had changed. It tasted me. It decided. The grinding resumed, but now it was my own bones. I felt my ribs flex as if they were cartilage. I felt my spine ripple. I felt my skull soften, then harden again in new ridges as if the universe was reshaping me into a better tooth. I wanted to die. I could not. Death was a concept inside the page. Outside there was only eating. I do not know how long I stayed aware. Time meant nothing in the mouth. There were only bites, pauses, swallows. In one pause I found myself back in the desert, half of me missing, bleeding slowly, my mouth full of new teeth. The rectangle of absence hovered above me like a portal. The crescent in the sky had grown so large it looked like a grin across the stars. The great void had come home. I crawled not to escape, but because instinct is stubborn. I dragged myself across sand that vibrated with chewing. I left a smear of blood that felt too bright against the dark. My remaining hand found my pocket and pulled out a small piece of plastic, a fragment of one of the destroyed drives. On it was a sliver of circuitry, a pattern. The rectangle hovered as if waiting. I did the only thing I could. I put the fragment in my mouth. My new teeth clicked around it. I chewed, slow, matching the cosmic rhythm. Plastic cracked, silicon crunched. The taste was bitter and sharp. The rectangle pulsed, and for a moment the chewing in my head synchronized perfectly, my jaw and the sky in phase, like two mouths moving together. I understood then the final horror. We had called it the sound of its chewing. But it was also the sound of ours, because it had made mouths out of what it touched, and it was teaching the universe to eat itself from the inside, to produce more bite marks, more voids, more clean absences. Cleaning was contagious. The great void was not just a wound left by a feeder. It was an infection of mouth. As I chewed the fragment, the rectangle pulsed again, and this time it did not bite my flesh. It bit my thoughts. A clean absence opened in my mind. A memory vanished, not fading but removed, leaving a smooth edge in my consciousness. I tried to hold on to my name, Ethan Cole, but the letters felt loose, as if they could be bitten out of order. I tried to remember Mason, Dr. Alvarez Harlan, but their faces slid away like meat between teeth. The only thing that remained clear was the rhythm. Grind, crack, pause, swallow. I chewed, and the universe chewed, and the sky smiled wider. If someone finds this, if these words survive on some page not yet bitten, know this. The great void is not empty. It is cleaned. It is a mouthprint, and the sound we heard was not a warning from far away. It was the chewing right beside our ears, the bite already happening, the jaw already closing. I can hear it now. I can feel it in my teeth. I can feel the next pause, the next swallow. The page is bending. The letters are loosening. My mouth is full.